When Jack asked his wife, Lauren, a single, blunt question one quiet night, he never imagined her answer would unravel their entire marriage. What followed wasn't screaming or chaos, but something far more devastating: silent revenge, public heartbreak, and the most unexpected twist of all. Monday nights were predictable at the Carter household in suburban Denver. The kids were asleep by 8, and Jack and Lauren settled into their usual routines. He'd lie in bed with a mystery novel. She'd retreat to her laptop to finish work-related tasks. The comfort of routine had always been their glue, until it wasn't. That night, something felt different. Jack couldn't focus on his book. His eyes scanned the pages, but the words blurred into each other. He glanced across the room. Lauren was typing, but her expression was off. Focused, yes, but not on her screen. Not really. It was like she wasn't fully there. Over the past few months, Jack had noticed a shift. Nothing obvious, just small, persistent changes. Her laughter came less easily. Her hugs felt practiced. Conversations skipped over the personal and settled into the practical. Groceries, school meetings, bills. Jack chalked it up to stress. Everyone was tired. Life was busy. But tonight, the distance felt like a canyon. Something in him snapped, not out of rage, but out of need. He set his book down, sat up straight, and asked quietly, "Are you seeing someone else?" Lauren froze. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, motionless. She didn't respond right away, but her reaction was louder than any words. A flash of guilt, a breath held too long. Her shoulders sank, and she looked away. Jack felt the answer hit him like a wave before she even spoke. When she finally did, her voice trembled. She admitted there was someone, Colin, a coworker. She described it as an emotional thing, insisted it wasn't physical, that it didn't mean anything. She avoided Jack's eyes as she spoke, as if doing so might soften the blow. But it didn't. Jack didn't shout. He didn't accuse. He listened, and each word etched deeper into his memory. Emotional or not, a line had been crossed. Trust wasn't a faucet you could turn back on. It was more like glass. Crack it once, and it's never quite the same. He stood up slowly, as if the air had grown thick. "I want you to sleep in the guest room," he said, voice even. Not out of punishment. It was a boundary, a shield, something to protect what little of himself wasn't yet broken. In the following days, their house became unrecognizable. Same walls, same photos on the fridge, but silence had taken over. Not the peaceful kind. This silence was heavy, deliberate. Meals were quiet. Eye contact was rare. When they spoke, it was about logistics. The kids, school pickups, nothing more. Lauren moved her things into the guest room without protest. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. And that almost made it worse. She began avoiding Jack, not out of fear, but out of shame. He could see it in how she entered rooms carefully, how she left them faster. Jack, meanwhile, kept his distance not out of coldness, but out of survival. Being near her felt like standing too close to an open wound. At night, he'd sit alone in the bedroom, the silence pressing in like a weight. He replayed their last few months, missed signs, strange texts she'd brushed off, the way she suddenly cared more about how she looked for work. He had noticed. He just hadn't wanted to believe it, and now belief was all he had. He didn't tell anyone. Not his brother, not his best friend, not even his therapist. Not yet. Part of him felt like talking about it would make it more real, as if silence might somehow reverse time. Lauren, for her part, tried to return to normal. She kept making dinner. She asked about his day. She even made his favorite lasagna one night, just like old times. Jack came home to a candlelit table and soft jazz playing from her phone. He sat down, looked at the plate, then poured his glass of red wine over the food. Not in rage, but in mourning. The act said everything he couldn't. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She just watched, stunned, as the wine soaked into the dish she'd made with trembling hands. Jack stood up and left the room without another word. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if forgiveness was possible. But in that moment, he knew this. Something had shattered, and no amount of food, music, or forced smiles could unbreak it. After the ruined dinner, things didn't explode. They eroded, quietly, relentlessly. Lauren stopped trying to bridge the gap, not because she didn't want to, but because every attempt was met with silence. Jack was polite around the kids, functional in conversations, but emotionally unreachable. When he spoke to Lauren, his voice was stripped of tone. No warmth, no anger, just blank. She realized her mistake hadn't just broken trust. It had removed her from his life without him needing to physically move out. He was there, in the same house, but she could feel the distance in the way he walked past her, how he no longer said goodnight, how his presence no longer carried any sense of inclusion. It was exile without a declaration. But Lauren didn't give up completely. She knew Jack wasn't vindictive. He was steady, restrained, and incredibly loyal. Until now. And even now, he wasn't punishing her. He was protecting himself. She decided to take a step. Colin, the man she'd gotten emotionally entangled with, still worked in the same office. Though they had ended the relationship, his presence remained a daily reminder. A reminder she knew Jack hadn't forgotten. Avoiding him in the hallway or skipping lunch breaks wasn't enough. Lauren requested a department transfer. She didn't tell Jack. She didn't even explain the full truth to her supervisor. But she made the move, quietly, decisively. When her request was approved and she started in a different department, she felt a small flicker of progress. Not because she expected gratitude, but because it was the first real thing she'd done to take ownership of the mess she'd created. Still, the shift at work didn't translate to home. Jack's schedule started changing. He stayed out later. He returned after the kids were asleep. When Lauren asked gently, cautiously, where he'd been, he'd answer with the same rehearsed words, "Just needed some air," or "caught up with a friend." No specifics, no names. One evening, she noticed something new. He came home with a small paper bag. Takeout, clearly, but not for the family. He went straight to the bedroom, and the door clicked shut behind him. It dawned on her then, Jack was finding space. Not in the house, but outside of it. Somewhere beyond her reach. Somewhere that didn't involve memories or betrayal or forced apologies. She wanted to ask him if there was someone else, but she didn't. She knew how it would sound. She knew the irony. So instead, she waited and watched. He stopped checking in with her about the kids' school schedules. He no longer reminded her about soccer games or dentist appointments. He handled them himself. Every responsibility they once shared, he took on alone. Not to spite her, but because he no longer saw her as part of the team. The kids noticed. They didn't say it aloud, but they picked up on the energy. The way they looked to Jack first for answers. The way they hugged her a little less tightly before bedtime. Lauren knew the silence wouldn't hold forever. Eventually something would give. And it did, at the park. It was a warm Saturday, the kind of afternoon they used to spend together as a family. She had taken the kids out for a few hours. Jack was supposed to meet them later. When he arrived, he wasn't alone. Amanda. Lauren didn't know her, but she knew what she was seeing. Amanda was relaxed, familiar. She smiled easily. She interacted with the kids like it wasn't her first time. Jack introduced her simply. "This is Amanda, a friend." The kids accepted her presence without hesitation, which only deepened Lauren's dread. This wasn't a trial run. This had been happening, quietly, steadily, outside Lauren's view. As she watched Jack and Amanda talk, laugh, and move naturally with the kids, she felt herself slipping into the background. The woman who once shared Jack's life was now a bystander, watching a new dynamic form that didn't include her. On the ride home, she said nothing. Neither did Jack. The kids chatted in the back seat, oblivious. But the front seat was filled with tension so thick, it was hard to breathe. That night, when the kids were asleep, Lauren sat alone in the guest room. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She just stared at the ceiling, realizing something terrifying. This wasn't Jack acting out. This was Jack healing, without her. His late nights, his polite distance, the removed intimacy. None of it was about revenge. It was survival. Amanda wasn't a reaction. She was a replacement. Lauren had believed there was still time to fix things. That effort, consistency, and humility could bring Jack back. But now, watching the life she used to have unfold around someone else, she understood. Jack wasn't punishing her. He was moving on. After that day at the park, there was no need for confirmation. Lauren didn't ask questions, and Jack didn't offer explanations. Amanda's presence had already answered everything. Lauren kept up appearances for the kids, waking them up, packing lunches, helping with homework. But her days began to blur. Jack, meanwhile, became more purposeful. He woke up earlier, stayed out longer, smiled more often, but never at her. He wasn't cold anymore, just unreachable. One afternoon, Jack left his phone on the living room table. A message popped up. Amanda. A short text. Same time tomorrow? No emojis, no hearts, just casual familiarity. Lauren didn't open it. She didn't have to. The informality said everything. It wasn't new. This had been going on for a while. She stood there staring at the phone, wondering how it had come to this. Not long ago, she was the one sending messages, caught up in a fantasy she told herself meant nothing. Now she was on the outside looking in, watching someone else build what she had destroyed. That night, she tried to talk to Jack. I saw Amanda's message, she said quietly. He didn't flinch, didn't get defensive. He just looked at her and nodded, as if to say, yes, and I didn't think it would happen this fast. Jack leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. You didn't think I'd move on? He asked, not angrily, but with a kind of tired disbelief. I thought there was still something left to fix, she admitted. He nodded slowly. There was, but you didn't fix it when it mattered. The words hit harder than anything she'd expected. Not cruel, just true. Jack didn't yell. He didn't accuse. He simply walked away. After that, the house became even quieter. Not tense, just distant. They stopped pretending around each other. Their conversations became strictly logistical. When Jack spoke, it was about the kids or bills. When Lauren spoke, it was to confirm drop-offs or appointments. They shared the same house, the same hallway, the same kitchen. But the connection was gone, and Lauren was finally beginning to understand that silence wasn't an opening. It was a door that had already closed. Jack continued seeing Amanda. He never hid it. He wasn't boastful either. It was just part of his life now. Sometimes Lauren would hear his car pulling in later than usual. Sometimes she'd hear laughter from the living room when he was on the phone. And sometimes on the weekends, he'd be gone from morning to evening. One evening, the kids were playing in the backyard. Lauren stood at the sink, watching them, when Jack came in. I'm taking them to the Science Museum Saturday, he said. Amanda's coming too. Lauren turned. Do they know? They like her, he said. It's been easy for them. That sentence stung more than she expected. She nodded, unsure what else to say. There was no fight left in her, no plea that wouldn't sound pathetic. She had done this, and now she was watching the aftermath unfold without any say in how it played out. That weekend, she stayed home while Jack and Amanda took the kids out. When they returned, the kids were excited, showing off pictures on their phones. Lauren smiled and listened, pretending not to notice the way Amanda's name came up so easily now. Later that night, when everyone was asleep, Jack knocked on the guest room door. Can we talk? He asked. Lauren sat up. Yeah. He didn't sit. He stood near the door. I don't hate you, he said. I never did. She looked at him, unsure how to respond. But I can't go back. I've tried. I've done the therapy. I've given it time. But I'm done pretending. Lauren's throat tightened. I'm seeing Amanda, he continued. Not because I want to hurt you, because she's simple, honest. And right now, that's what I need. Lauren looked down. I understand. Jack nodded once. I think it's time we talk about how to move forward, officially. She knew what that meant. Divorce, custody, schedules. It was the conversation she'd been dreading, not because she didn't see it coming, but because it made everything final. That night after Jack left, Lauren sat alone in the guest room. No tears, no denial, just silence. For the first time, she realized the full weight of what she had lost. Not just Jack, but the life they'd built, the small traditions, the inside jokes, the future they'd once imagined together. All of it had been slipping away, and now it was gone, and she had no one to blame but herself. After Jack's quiet declaration that it was time to move forward officially, the house felt even more temporary. Everything still looked the same. But Lauren knew it wasn't home anymore. Not for Jack, and not really for her either. They began discussing logistics in short, focused meetings in the kitchen. No raised voices, no drawn-out debates, just matter-of-fact decisions about custody, school pickups, and who would keep which pieces of furniture. Jack handled most of the paperwork. Lauren agreed to shared custody, knowing she couldn't argue for more than half. Not when she'd been the one to shatter the trust. There were no lawyers yelling across tables, no courtrooms, just two people who had once loved each other, now dividing a life they no longer shared. Lauren moved into a small apartment nearby. It wasn't far. She wanted the kids to feel as little disruption as possible. But on the nights they stayed with Jack, the silence in her new place was suffocating. The emptiness wasn't just in the rooms, it was in her reflection, in the way she moved through her day without purpose. Jack, meanwhile, adapted quickly. He and Amanda didn't move in together, but she was present. Sometimes she picked the kids up from school, sometimes she joined them for dinner. Lauren found herself hearing about Amanda's cooking or Amanda's dog from the kids. They weren't trying to hurt her, they were just sharing, and that made it worse. At first, Lauren tried to stay involved. She texted Jack updates about the kids. Sometimes she sent photos from their weekends together. His replies were always polite, brief. She eventually stopped. There was no warmth to pull from, only closure. Over time, the neighbors began to notice the change. Questions came, some subtle, some direct. Lauren answered vaguely, "We're working through things, just focusing on the kids." But even that became harder to say with conviction. One afternoon, Lauren ran into Amanda at a grocery store. The exchange was brief, civil. Amanda offered a polite nod, and Lauren returned it. Neither of them said anything else. There was no need. Everything had already been said without words. Back at home, Lauren stared at her phone. She considered calling Jack, just to talk, just to hear something familiar. But she didn't. She knew how it would go. He'd answer with that same steady tone, not cold but distant, and she'd hang up feeling worse than before. Instead, she focused on the kids, on routines. She became more involved with their school, volunteered for weekend activities. It was the only time she felt whole, when they were laughing, running, needing her. But the contrast was painful. When they returned to Jack's house, they ran toward it eagerly. Lauren often sat in her car for a few minutes after drop-off, staring at the house she used to share with him. Now it was just a shell of a past she couldn't return to. On one of the shared weekends, the kids asked if Amanda could join them for a birthday outing. Lauren smiled and agreed. But later, alone in her apartment, she broke down for the first time in weeks. Not because Amanda was the problem, but because she wasn't. She was just there. And that made it all feel permanent. Even Jack had changed. He wasn't angry anymore. He was calm, content. He laughed more with the kids. He looked healthier, lighter. Lauren noticed the difference during handoffs. He seemed like someone who had found peace after years of carrying something heavy. She, on the other hand, was still carrying it, every day. Every time she passed the park they used to go to. Every time she opened an email from the school addressed to both of them. Every time she heard a joke on the radio that Jack would have loved. Eventually, she started therapy. Not to get Jack back. She knew that chapter was closed, but to understand how she'd gotten so far off course. The sessions were difficult, honest, unforgiving, but necessary. For the first time, Lauren stopped looking at what she'd lost and started examining who she'd become. She began to accept that some things couldn't be fixed. That remorse, while real, wasn't always enough. That consequences weren't always loud. They could be quiet, steady, permanent. Jack never spoke poorly of her to the kids. He never brought up the past. He simply moved forward. And that, more than anything, showed Lauren who he truly was. On one of the last days before their divorce was finalized, Jack sent her a message. It was simple. "Thank you for being fair. I hope things get easier for you." Lauren stared at the text for a long time. She didn't reply. Not because she didn't want to, but because she knew that was his way of saying goodbye. Not cruel, just final. The divorce was finalized on a Thursday. No courtroom appearance, just signed papers delivered through an attorney's office. Lauren received the confirmation in an email. One sentence was all it took to end 14 years of marriage. She sat alone for a while after reading it. No tears, just stillness. The kind that comes when reality finally settles in. Not as a threat, but as fact. That weekend, the kids were with Jack. They went on a camping trip with Amanda. Lauren stayed home and cleaned her apartment. Not because it needed it, but because doing something repetitive helped her stay grounded. She didn't check social media. She didn't look at old photos. She didn't let herself spiral. Progress, however slow, was still progress. In therapy, Lauren started unpacking more than just the affair. She talked about the years before, about how routine had slowly replaced connection, how they had stopped checking in with each other, how she'd assumed love was permanent just because it had once been strong. Her therapist never judged, only listened, and asked questions that made her think differently. It wasn't about blame, it was about responsibility. Lauren began to understand that cheating wasn't just a mistake, it was a choice made in the absence of effort, honesty, and vulnerability. She hadn't just broken Jack's heart, she had stepped out of a commitment she'd once made with her whole self. In the months that followed, she stopped waiting for a moment to get back what she lost. Instead, she focused on rebuilding who she was. Not the woman Jack married, but the woman who had learned, painfully and fully, from what she'd done. She reconnected with old friends, picked up photography again, and started taking short weekend trips with the kids. Nothing elaborate, just small escapes where they could build new memories. She never badmouthed Jack. And when the kids talked about Amanda, she listened without reacting. They were happy, and that mattered more than her discomfort. One day during a parent-teacher conference, Lauren and Jack ended up walking out together. Amanda had stayed home with the kids. Jack asked, "How have you been?" It was the first personal question he'd asked in nearly a year. She answered honestly, "Better than I expected." He nodded. "I'm glad." They stood in silence for a moment. Not awkward, just honest. "I never wanted this to be how it ended," she said. "I know," he replied, "but it's where we are." Lauren didn't ask about Amanda. Jack didn't offer any details. It wasn't necessary. Their story had closed, but the understanding between them remained. Clearer now that the pain had passed. Over time, their interactions became more natural. They coordinated school events without tension, shared holidays without conflict. The kids noticed, and that mattered. Even if the marriage hadn't survived, the family structure had evolved. Not ideal, but stable. One night after a long day, Lauren was helping her daughter with a school project when the little girl asked, "Are you sad you and Daddy don't live together anymore?" Lauren paused, then answered, "I was, but I'm okay now, and Daddy's okay too. That's what matters." It was the truth, not the easy kind, but the real kind. Lauren still had moments where memories caught her off guard. A song, a street they once walked down together, a movie they used to quote, but they no longer hurt the same way. They were reminders of a life lived fully and a lesson learned deeply. She knew she would love again, not because she needed someone to fix her, but because she had rebuilt herself from the ground up. Next time she'd do it differently, more openly, more carefully, and more gratefully. Jack and Amanda eventually moved in together. The kids adjusted without resistance. Lauren was invited to birthdays, school plays, and family events. She went, not because she had to, but because she could. By letting go of what she couldn't change, Lauren made space for what could grow. Her mistake had cost her a marriage, but it had also forced her to face truths she'd avoided for years. In the end, Jack had given her something she hadn't expected. A clean break, no bitterness, no revenge, just a boundary, and a quiet hope that she'd find peace. And she did.